My daughter, along with thousands of Jewish freshmen around the country, left for college in August. Hillels on campuses everywhere reached out to invite students to Shabbat dinner. Amongst my daughter's friends, there was strong interest. But soon a text chat began circulating. "I'm not sure I want to go," one said. I might get canceled. Another wrote, "I think I'll go, but there's no way I'm putting my name on any sign-in list or appearing in any photos." One freshman we know decided to go to the dinner, which included Shabbat blessings and sushi and small talk. Nothing political was discussed. When it came time for a group picture, however, several left the room. One student concluded, "I'm never going back to that again." In his view, it seemed any association with something Jewish was inherently problematic. So what does it mean to be a public Jew right now? What does it mean to wear a Magen David, a Jewish star, on Instagram, to show up to a Hillel event, to march in an Israel parade? Since when did our kids have to hesitate before showing up at a Shabbat dinner? Wearing what their mere presence might project about who they stand with or what they stand for. Now, this story is not an isolated incident. A 2021 Brandeis Center survey of Jewish students on campuses found 50% said they hide their Jewish identity. Half of our kids are hiding. A student gave color to these numbers, saying, "When I meet new people and they ask me what I'm involved in on campus, I always hesitate to admit that I am involved in Hillel and the Jewish community, afraid of how they might react. Many people view us as the oppressors, echoing the classic anti-Semitic trope that Jews are responsible for everything wrong in the world." Parents have shared with me that they advise their kids to be proud of their Judaism, but not overt about it. And part of what I find most surprising about this recent study and the stories I am now hearing from our parents here at Micah and students is not the increase of anti-Semitic acts and conspiracy theories. What I find devastating is watching the impact anti-Semitism is having on our next generation who feel they need to downplay or deny their Jewish identity, who have absorbed the idea that just being a Jew confers some kind of culpability, brings shame. That's a chilling turn. So for the sake of this sermon today, I want to offer a simple definition. Anti-Semitism is the symbolization of the Jew, turning the Jew into a symbol for whatever a given society or civilization regards as its most objectionable qualities. So, under Christianity, there was nothing more loathsome than to be Christ's killer. And under Islam, we were popularly called the killers of prophets. And there is no greater calumny than to be a people who murders its own prophets. Under Marxism, the Jew was the ultimate capitalist. Under Nazism, the Jew was the race polluter. And now, in the era of international human rights, where the most detestable qualities of this civilization are apartheid, colonialism, ethnic cleansing, genocide, lo and behold, the Jewish state becomes the most hated country in the world by far. Anti-Semites throughout history have tended to target that aspect of Jewish identity that most separates us from others, that defines us most uniquely. So for example, in pagan times, it was a long time ago, but The scandal of Jewish particularism was our faith in the one God. That is what separated the Jewish people from other peoples. In our time, I would argue that one of the crucial defining elements for the Jewish people in terms of our distinctiveness is the Jewish state. It's not monotheism anymore. Anti-Zionism is the latest variation of what was once called Christian supersessionism. And the basic idea of supersessionism is that the Jews no longer deserve their own story. Once Christianity came along and the Jewish people did not recognize Jesus as Savior, we forfeited the Bible as our story. We no longer deserved our story. It was given to us, and then it was taken away because we didn't deserve it anymore. For classical Christianity, this was a permanent, irrevocable judgment. If you look at how our contemporary story is playing out in secular terms, we are experiencing a progressive version of supersessionism. We do not deserve the story of this land. We are not part of this land. That is the message. From the river to the sea, you are not part of this history. And now, post-October 7th, we no longer belong in the story of the Holocaust either. We have forfeited that story. We are no longer worthy of carrying that story because we've abused that story. We are charged with hiding behind that story to perpetuate another Holocaust. To the critic, there is no greater hypocrite state in the world than Israel. We claim to be the victims. October 7th, we were the big victims. And then October 8th and beyond, and look what we've done to Gaza. We hide behind the Holocaust again. We're the victims of the Holocaust, and we misuse that to try to deflect criticism and pretend to be victims. There is actually a deeper issue we need to face. And that is the question of anti-Semitism in the age of Jewish power. In the past, when Jews were accused of ritually murdering Christian children or being Christ killers, we all knew that was ludicrous. But today there are dead Palestinian children whom we've killed because power means that you have forfeited your innocence. Tal Becker, legal advisor of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and veteran member of successive Israeli peace negotiation teams, explains it like this. On October 7th, a pogrom took place where pogroms were never meant to happen again. Israel was supposed to be the answer. But unlike the usual response to pogroms throughout Jewish history, when Jews chose to either flee or assimilate, Israel stood up on October 8th, a unified country determined to fight back. To critics calling on Israel to stop the war, saying, "Enough," Becker responds, "The tragedy of war follows us every day, but the answer cannot be enough. That answer gives Hamas a victory, and it allows it to rule in Gaza, which condemns Israelis and Palestinians to live under a death cult." Becker observed that Israel represents two ideas that are anathema to a certain way that people see the world today. One is power, which is viewed as inherently unjust by many in our society. Yes, Becker says it must be used wisely and as compassionately as possible. And he recognizes that many American Jews, many of you I would suspect, are really not so comfortable with that. But Becker reminds us that power is good and just in that it allows us to defend ourselves. And the other prevalent ideology out of sync with Israeli culture asserts that victimhood is a virtue. It is not a virtue. It is a condition. And Zionism, defined as the movement for self-determination and statehood for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland, is also the refusal to be victims, even though some of us have a very hard time letting go of victimhood. The longing that I sense among many Jews here in America is that longing for innocence, for victimhood, especially after October 7th. On October 7th, we were victims, but not on October 8th. Starting October 8th, we made a very deliberate decision. The virtual entirety of Jewish Israel made a collective decision to go to war and not to allow the disastrous perception of Jewish victimhood to stand. Yossi Klein Halevi of the Hartman Institute reflects, we all knew what we were getting into. We all knew what this war was going to look like because many of us know Gaza. Many of us have been there, or our kids have fought in previous wars. We went in with eyes wide open. Now, one of the responsibilities of power is that you have to give up the identity of the victim. You can't have it both ways. In 1945, the Jewish people made a decision, and that was almost the entirety of the Jewish people at that time. The Jewish people made a decision to go for power. And we decided that powerlessness had become untenable, literally untenable for Jews. And that decision was undoubtedly one of the greatest moments in Jewish history. And we are all living the very flourishing Jewish lives and communal lives that we enjoy because the generation after the Holocaust made the decision to go for power. And so, there's the ability now to make sure that October 7th does not happen again. But one of the consequences is the ruins of Gaza. And this is the moment where we have to own the full implications of power. There is a moment in the Kuzari. The Kuzari is one of the most famous works of the medieval Spanish Jewish philosopher, physician, and poet Judah Halevi. It was completed in the Hebrew year 4900. And the rabbi says to the king, "We're the best religion because we're the most moral religion. We don't kill anybody." And the king says, "You know, you can talk, but what'll happen once you have an army? Come back to me and let me know." This is our Kuzari moment. What happens when we have an army? And not only what happens when we have an army, but what happens when you have an army and October 7th? What happens when you have gone already through 2,000 years of Jewish history and you finally come home and it does not end? The war against Jewish legitimacy and Jewish existence continues. Those are the conditions in which we have reclaimed power. Those are the conditions in which the morality of the Jewish people is being tested, and I would argue that that is one of the ultimate tests that any people could confront. Shortly after October 7th, one of our members came to see me, and she was really struggling. She said she recognizes Israel's legitimacy as a state. She even lived in Israel for some time. She told me that she understands the consequences of Jewish power, that there will be bloodshed. People will die at our hands. And she asked me, "Rabbi, is it worth it? Is having a Jewish state worth it?" So it's easy for me to say, of course it's worth it. Without Israel, we would not flourish as American Jews. Without Israel, we would have no sense of security in the world. And I believe those things. And I still honor her struggle. because it's heartfelt and it's honest and it's raw. So here we are. To say it's complicated is an understatement. I don't have the answers. I wish I did. It took me a lot of hours staring at a blank computer screen to write the sermon because I simply did not know what kind of optimism or hope I might offer you. And I knew that things would change, as they have on the daily in the Middle East. But here is what I do know. Hiding our Judaism, our Jewish pride, that is not the answer. Not going to Shabbat dinner at Hillel, it's not the answer. Now, all parents, when asked if they would allow their child to take the risk of being assaulted or discriminated against for wearing something that identifies them as Jewish, well, the most universal impulse almost always is to protect our children's safety. I get that. I don't like it, but it makes sense to me. The assertion of American values, hatred of tyrants, love of liberty, freedom of thought and worship, the notion that all people are created equal, are also the assertion of Jewish ones. When the anti-Semite attacks Jews, he is also attacking America itself because American and Jewish ideals are harmonious. It is incumbent upon us to be brave enough to say, yes, we're different. We are part of a tradition that is far bigger than this current political moment, a tradition that will help us through it. We need to be courageous enough to stand apart and not bend to the crowd. And since October 7th, I have shed more tears than I can remember, and I am not a crier. I cried hearing stories from families who lost loved ones. I cried seeing pictures of children who were hostages. I cried reading stories of selflessness and heroism of Israelis. And then I noticed I was only crying for my own people. The brutality on October 7th and the subsequent pain felt so enormous. The response from the rest of the world, from campuses to the United Nations, so callous and hypocritical that I didn't have the emotional space or tears left for the other side. It almost felt too threatening, like a betrayal. The Talmud teaches us there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses put there, which, according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, teaches there must have been something else in the ark besides the tablets themselves. What was it? Turns out the broken pieces of the first set of tablets were also placed in the ark. The broken and the whole together. Judaism requires that we cultivate a heart that can hold both joy and sorrow. And I take this to understand that we have to work to hold multiple truths at the same time. I don't want to be the victim. I want to have agency as a Jew. I want for Israel to be able to defend herself. And the pain that our fellow Micah member expressed to me, her pain is real and it is so Jewish. If we want to truly live Jewish values, we have to weep for the suffering of all who suffer, all who are caught in this seemingly endless war. Not just because Judaism requires this of us, but because I am certain that our selective tears will contribute to this vicious cycle of dehumanization. Think of the pain and the outrage that we felt when others refused to believe the atrocities of October 7th, refused to watch the film, to condemn the gender violence. We called out to the world, you don't have to agree with Israeli policies, but just see the suffering of your fellow human beings. So I say the same to us. Put aside who deserves blame, and let's just witness the enormous suffering. I'm not a crier, But I cried when I learned that parents in Gaza have been writing the names of their children on their arms and legs so that they can be identified under the wreckage if the worst happens. To cry is to see their fellow humanity. To cry is to preserve our own as well. Now, this is not a political or military strategy. That is to defend Israel's existence, her present and future. To cry is not a political or military strategy, it's a spiritual one. It's a spiritual strategy for our souls so that we might imagine a different day after. There is room to be a steadfast Zionist, to believe in Israel's legitimacy and necessity, to care about human suffering, Jewish and non-Jewish, and to imagine a future in which Israel exists and suffering does not. As soon as the IDF gave the all clear on Tuesday night after Iran's ballistic missile attack, a lone Levy rushed to a wedding ceremony that he had been invited to attend. Moments earlier, everyone had been crouched in bomb shelters, but he arrived to the guests dancing to I Will Survive. And he posted, "Israelis are truly mental. This country is not real. This is why we survive. Our love of life is irrepressible." It is true that our Jewish superpower is joy. So it may sound strange when I say that I think the path to Israel's eventual well-being will be paved by our tears. I know it because the famous Psalm 126 recalls that Jewish memory for us. Shir amalot b'shuv Adonai et shivat Zion chayinu kechomim. When God restored the well-being of Zion, we were like dreamers. The song of ascents that I just quoted is sung on Shabbat and holidays, a song of redemption and joy when Israel is restored after exile. But the end of the psalm tells us something extraordinary, that the well-being of Zion is restored because of our tears. It says, "Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them." The psalm instructs us to go out weeping. In the most desolate places, the fields of the Nova Music Festival, the orchards of Kibbutz Be'eri, now emptied of residents, the rubble of Gaza City, with an audacious act of hope, carrying seeds. And our weeping, our tears of empathy and humanity is what will water those tiny seeds so that someday we, like dreamers, might reap a different harvest. Good Yontif.